Okay, let's unpack this. Today, we are diving deep into a figure who stands as perhaps the ultimate paradox in 20th century academia. The Hungarian mathematician Paul Erdős, born Paul Erdős in 1913.
And he is just a fascinating character.
Absolutely. Erdős became indisputably the most prolific mathematical mind of his era. We are talking about a man who published an astronomical 1,500 mathematical papers in his lifetime.
A number that's still hard to get your head around.
It really is. That figure remains unsurpassed and frankly is almost unbelievable when you compare it to the typical output of even the most brilliant academic. But the real story here, the central paradox we are chasing in the sources you shared, is that this unparalleled genius led a life that was completely unconventional, anti-materialistic, and fundamentally collaborative.
Indeed. It was a life so unique that Time magazine famously described him as the oddball's oddball. Our mission today is to understand not just what he contributed mathematically, but how his unique existence itinerant, deeply social, focused solely on the pursuit of proof, didn't just facilitate his work, but fundamentally was his mathematical practice.
It was the work itself.
Yes, he didn't just accumulate theorems, he created a sprawling global social geometry of knowledge.
It's the sheer scale of that geometry that is staggering. He didn't just publish more papers than anyone else, he did it almost entirely with co-authors. This wasn't the work of a solitary genius sequestered away in an ivory tower.
Exactly. His legacy is measured in theorems, yes, but equally in human relationships. The source material shows he worked with 511 different collaborators in his lifetime.
511.
Think about that number. That incredible breadth of partnership is what sets his unique social practice of mathematics in radical contrast to the classic image of the solitary thinker, the Gauss or the Newton who worked alone, staring at a blank page. Erdős was always moving, always connecting, needing that spark of shared energy to thrive.
So let's start at the beginning, setting the stage for the development of this very unconventional mind. Paul Erdős Paul was born in Budapest, then part of Austria-Hungary in 1913. But his early life was marred by profound tragedy, creating an environment of intense sheltered focus.
It was a heartbreaking foundation. His parents, Anna and Lajos, were both mathematics high school teachers. But just days before Paul was born, his two older sisters, aged 3 and 5, both died suddenly of scarlet fever.
Oh, wow.
And the sources suggest this was just a defining trauma for the family.
You can only imagine. The biography suggests this horrific loss led to an extremely close, almost symbiotic relationship with his mother, Anna. It's documented that they shared the same bed until he eventually left for university.
Right, and that really speaks volumes about the intensity of their bond and the sheltered intellectual environment that became his entire world.
An environment that was, what, just completely saturated with mathematics?
Completely. His parents immersed him in the subject. And there's an interesting detail here. His father, Lajos, was held captive in Siberia as an Austro-Hungarian prisoner of war from 1914 to 1920.
So for the first 6-7 years of his life?
Exactly. And while he was a captive, Lajos taught himself English. But because he had no native speaker to correct him, he mispronounced many words.
So he learned it from a book, essentially.
Pretty much. And when he returned and taught English to Paul, Paul retained his father's unique, often incorrect pronunciations for the rest of his life. It was this little linguistic anomaly that just stuck with him.
What a fantastic detail about his unique vocabulary, which I know we'll get into a lot more later. But his genius blossomed in this protected space. He didn't learn to read using primers. He taught himself through the math texts his parents left lying around.
Right. And the classic anecdote, the one everyone tells, is that by age 5, he could calculate in his head, without pause, how many seconds a person had lived, given their age.
That's just an unbelievable skill. He was a human calendar and clock simultaneously.
And he wasn't just doing parlor tricks. By 16, his father had introduced him to deep concepts in infinite series and set theory, which were subjects that would dominate his professional career. He was an ardent solver of the problems published in Kumol, the mathematical and physical journal for secondary schools, which was this, famous incubator for future Hungarian geniuses.
And his academic start was immediate and spectacular, though clouded by the politics of the time. He began university at the Royal Hungarian Pázmány Péter University when he was just 17 after winning a national examination.
Yeah, and this success was achieved despite the severe numerus clausus restrictions placed on Jewish students in Hungarian universities at the time.
Which, that historical context is just essential for understanding his entire life, isn't it?
It's everything. The numerous clauses was designed specifically to limit the number of Jewish students allowed entry. So to overcome this systemic discrimination and still gain admittance meant that he had to perform at an exceptionally high, almost flawless level.
And he did. By age 20, he published a proof for Bertrand's postulative problem that had first been proven by Chebyshev, 70 years earlier?
That's right. So he essentially took a known important problem and found a cleaner, newer, more elegant way to prove it.
What does the postulate state, exactly?
It states that for any number 1 greater than 1, there is always at least one prime number such that 1p $200. Basically, you'll always find a prime between any number and its double.
And his proof was just simpler.
Simpler, more direct. It signaled his early trajectory as a major figure in number theory, a trajectory that was all about solving existing problems, but with this incredible elegance.
So he earns his doctorate quickly in 1934 at the age of 21 under the highly influential advisor Laporte-Fugere, who was known for mentoring mathematical giants like John von Neumann and George Polya.
I mean, he was at the absolute center of Hungarian mathematical brilliance.
But the world outside the math lecture hall was rapidly becoming overtly hostile.
That's right. The rising tide of anti-Semitism and the increasing oppression of Jews under the authoritarian Hungarian regime meant he couldn't stay safely in Budapest. Immediately after earning his doctorate, he took a postdoctoral fellowship in Manchester, England.
And it sounds like this was less a career opportunity and more a necessity.
A necessary departure from impending danger, absolutely.
And while he was in Manchester, he was connecting with other legends. This is where he first encountered G.H. Hardy, one of the most famous British mathematicians of the era, and Stanisław Ulam.
Right, a foundational figure in 20th century physics and computing, and a future collaborator. But Europe was spiraling toward war, forcing yet another, even more significant move.
He relocated to the United States in 1938, accepting a scholarship at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton. He had to leave Europe entirely because, by this point, Hungary was simply too dangerous for any Jew.
So he begins his time in America, but the war years were just devastating for the family he left behind.
The sources confirm the profound wartime loss. Many family members, including 2 aunts, 2 uncles, and his father, Lajos, died in Budapest during World War II.
His mother, Anna, was the only immediate family member to survive, and he was working in Princeton at the time, completely isolated from this catastrophe at home.
Which must have just intensified his focus on mathematics. It was the one stable thing.
It was. But here we see the first major collision between his personality and the academic establishment. Despite his obvious world-class genius and important early papers, his fellowship at Princeton was only extended by 6 months, not the expected year.
6 months. For one of the century's most brilliant young minds. The reason they gave was that Princeton found him uncouth and unconventional.
Precisely. The Institute for Advanced Study at that time expected a certain level of social decorum, administrative self-sufficiency, conformity.
And Erdős did not conform.
Not in any sense of the word. He was utterly devoted to mathematical problems, sometimes forgetting basic hygiene or social graces. He simply couldn't be bothered with the small details of life. And this refusal to conform really set the stage for his entire adult existence, a life spent entirely outside the normal, stable institutional structure.
So because Princeton found him messy, he became a permanent wanderer. His biographer, Paul Hoffman, described him as probably the most eccentric mathematician in the world.
I think that's fair. He spent the majority of his adult life living out of a suitcase, maintaining an entirely itinerant lifestyle devoted solely to writing mathematical papers with other people.
This was the birth of the wandering scholar persona. After Princeton, he was forced to take a continuous series of temporary positions across America. UPenn, Notre Dame, Purdue, Stanford, Syracuse.
He couldn't settle down because no single institution seemed willing to house his genius permanently alongside his unconventional habits. He literally traveled among mathematical departments until his death in 1996.
And what makes this system so unique is the collaborative contract he had with his hosts. He wasn't just a guest, he was an intellectual obligation.
That's a great way to put it.
When he descended upon a colleague's home, the sources say he expected his host to provide lodging, food, and laundry, all the essentials of daily life that he found tedious or impossible to manage himself.
Yes, and the crucial logistical detail. They also had to arrange transport to his next location. He was outsourcing his entire administrative existence.
It's genius, in a way.
It is. He would typically arrive, drop his single suitcase, and announce the famous line, "My brain is open." He was exchanging raw, high-level mathematical genius and unparalleled collaboration for basic sustenance and logistics. He was essentially a human intellectual engine needing only fuel and mechanics.
That makes perfect sense for someone whose mind was so focused. But this traveling lifestyle and his Hungarian citizenship landed him in serious political hot water during the Red Scare and the McCarthy era in the U.S.
Oh, absolutely. That political complication in the 1950s was nearly career-ending. In 1954, the U.S. Immigration and Naturalization Service denied him a re-entry visa,
And the accusation was that he was a communist sympathizer.
a label likely triggered by his extensive correspondence with scientists in communist countries and his decision to attend a conference in, of all places, East Germany.
The irony is just, it's so rich here. This is a man who saw the Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin as the embodiment of the supreme fascist, which was his nickname for God, and he's being accused of being a communist operative.
Exactly. He chose to leave the U.S. rather than stay and fight the decision, and this denial lasted nearly a decade. He moved to Israel, taking positions at the Hebrew University and later a permanent visiting professor role at the Technion. But he periodically requested reconsideration from the U.S., desperate to resume his collaborations across America, which was still the global center of mathematical innovation.
And the situation was even more complex because his home country, Hungary, was now firmly a Warsaw Pact country. Travel in and out of those nations was highly restricted for anyone.
And here's where his stature became a geopolitical tool. It's really incredible. Due to his international mathematical stature, in 1956, the Hungarian government granted Erdős the exclusive privilege of being allowed to enter and exit the country freely.
That's almost unheard of for a citizen of a Warsaw Pact nation at the time.
It is. He was a global scientific anomaly, protected by his own country's communist government while being barred by the ostensibly free United States.
It's astonishing. His importance to the field literally transcended the Iron Curtain. He was a geopolitical exception, just carrying proofs and problems between continents.
He was, but the U.S. visa denial remained a frustrating obstacle until 1963. It wasn't until then that the Immigration and Naturalization Service finally granted him permission to resume teaching and traveling freely to American institutions. So, his wandering life was partly a philosophical choice to maximize mathematical output, but also, for a significant period, a bitter institutional necessity driven by initial academic rejection and later political persecution.
Okay, let's turn now to the mathematics, because all of this unique structure, this whole lifestyle, was built entirely to support his work.
What's fascinating here is how Erdős managed such astounding output. He published around 1,525 mathematical articles, mostly with co-authors.
I think we just need to sit with that scale for a second. In the history of mathematics, the only comparison is really Leonhard Euler, who published more pages, but Euler worked primarily by himself, generating these massive unified treatises.
Erdős inverted the Euler model completely. His model was not about solitary massive theory construction. It was about constant high-frequency collaboration, often resulting in short, focused papers that solved very specific problems.
With those 511 different collaborators.
Driven by his firm, almost religious belief that mathematics was fundamentally a social activity. He needed the input, the energy, and the divergent thinking of others to function mathematically.
This brings us to a crucial concept for understanding his style: the two cultures model, pioneered by mathematician Timothy Gowers. The source material highlights this sharp contrast, noting that Erdős was fundamentally a problem solver rather than a theory developer.
That distinction is absolutely crucial to grasping his legacy. Theory developers, the mathematicians who often win the prestigious Fields Medal, focus on building large, overarching conceptual frameworks. Think of algebraic geometry or modern topology that reorganize vast areas of mathematics. They build the cathedrals.
And Erdős, what was he doing?
Erdős, in contrast, was the world's greatest collector of beautiful stones. He concentrated resolutely on particular theorems and conjectures, cracking many previously unsolved problems in discrete mathematics. His approach was puzzle-centric, focused on the immediate, elegant, and often discrete truth. He was looking for the perfect specific solution, the one that belonged in the book.
And the source material notes that his position in the 20th century mathematical pantheon is actually a matter of some controversy precisely because of this focus.
It is. It's the bias of the field, isn't it? The field often rewards architects more than engineers, even if the engineer solves thousands of critical, localized problems.
So that's why he never won the Fields Medal.
It's very likely a major reason. While he received immense recognition, including the Wolf Prize in 83-84, it was awarded for his contributions across numerous fields: number theory, combinatorics, probability, and specifically for personally stimulating mathematicians the world over.
So the award itself was for the collaboration.
For stimulation and proliferation, not for a single foundational paradigm-shifting theory.
Let's delve into some of his specific, tangible contributions, because his work spanned almost every field.
He was a titan in discrete mathematics, graph theory, number theory, and probability theory. But if we want to capture the essence of his genius, two contributions really stand out for their lasting intellectual impact, and they both illustrate this unique problem-solving focus.
The first one being Ramsey theory.
Right. He championed and contributed heavily to Ramsey theory, which studies the conditions in which order necessarily appears in large systems. It's the mathematics of finding structure in chaos, guaranteeing that if a set of objects is large enough, it must contain some subset with a specific required property.
This sounds terribly abstract. Can you give us a concrete aha moment on what Ramsey theory actually proves?
Absolutely. The most famous example is the theorem on friends and strangers. Imagine any 6 people in a room. Ramsey theorem proves that among those 6 people, there must be at least 3 who are all mutual strangers, or at least 3 who are all mutual friends.
So you can't avoid it.
You can't avoid the structure. The order is inevitable given the size of the set. And Erdős excelled at defining the minimum conditions for that inevitable order to emerge, showing you how little randomness actually exists in large connected systems.
That makes the concept click. And second, there is his instrumental role in applying the probabilistic method.
This method, which established a whole new approach to extremal combinatorics, is perhaps his most innovative tool. It's often a non-constructive proof. It involves proving the existence of a mathematical object with certain properties, say a specific type of graph, by showing that if you construct this object randomly, the probability of it having the desired properties is greater than 0.
So instead of building the thing, you just prove that if you throw enough dice, it has to exist somewhere out there in the universe of possibilities.
Exactly. It's an existence proof without a roadmap. It's incredibly powerful because often the actual construction would be far too complex, but the probabilistic proof is just clean. And this method is now foundational across computer science and discrete math.
He also tackled classical problems, as we mentioned with Bertrand's postulate. But the most famous classical breakthrough was the elementary proof of the prime number theorem alongside Adel-Selberg.
This was a major result. The prime number theorem, the PNT, had previously required very heavy-duty complex analysis, a field that relies on continuous mathematics. Finding an elementary proof, one that uses only methods from number theory without complex analysis, was a huge defining moment.
It simplified the intellectual machinery required.
Massively.
Yet, this shared intellectual peak became one of the few serious personal controversies in his life. A bitter dispute with Selberg that lasted for years. How could such a beautiful shared discovery end in a major rift?
Well, it was messy. It was rooted in ego and the timing of academic credit, which is often brutal. Both were working on the proof, sharing results, building momentum. Selberg felt he had provided the key lemma, the critical step that made the elementary proof possible. But he was taking his time writing up his full paper.
And Erdős, seeing the breakthrough was imminent, encouraged him to publish quickly.
He did. But then Erdős rushed to publish his own version of the PNT proof based on their collaboration.
Oh, that's not good.
No. And when Erdős published, he did reference Selberg's work. But Selberg felt the credit was insufficiently weighted toward his contribution to that key lemma. He believed Erdős was claiming too much joint credit for a result that Selberg felt was primarily his intellectual property.
So it became a priority dispute?
It boiled over, leading to a long and public rift between two of the giants of number theory. It's a sad example of how even the pursuit of ultimate beauty can be marred by human competitive instincts, something pretty rare in Erdős' collaborative life.
And even in fields he seemingly had little professional interest in, like topology, he left his mark almost by accident. The sources mention the Erdős space,
which is the first example of a totally disconnected topological space that is not zero-dimensional. It just emphasizes his universal ability to find the counterexample or the specific solution, even outside his main combinatorial focus. He was simply a mathematical machine finding cracks in every structure he looked at.
Okay, moving on to his most famous legacy outside of co-authorship, the cash prizes. Ernst Strauss, a collaborator, called him the absolute monarch of problem posers.
And he backed that title up with a unique financial incentive structure. Erdős famously offered payments for solutions to unresolved problems. This turned his open questions into a sort of global scavenger hunt, focusing the energy of the mathematical community onto specific, bite-sized challenges,
The sources specify the range of these rewards. They went from $25
which he reserved for problems that he felt were just out of reach. A fun challenge.
all the way up to $10,000 for conjectures that were both extremely difficult to attack and mathematically significant.
And these payments were tangible proof of his commitment. The most lucrative prize, that $10,000 one, was offered for his conjecture on prime gaps, a major problem in number theory. It was finally solved in 2014 by a team of mathematicians, and the prize was paid out.
Let's discuss some of the most important, currently outstanding problems that are still worth money today.
Well, the most mathematically profound outstanding offer is for the Erdős conjecture on arithmetic progressions. That one carries a $5,000 prize.
And what does that state?
It states that if the sum of the reciprocals of a sequence of integers diverges, meaning it's a dense sequence, then the sequence must contain arithmetic progressions of arbitrary length.
So if that were proven, it would be massive. It would essentially prove that sequences of numbers that are dense enough to have an infinite sum of reciprocals cannot be random. They have to contain structure.
Exactly. It would solve several other open problems and provide deep insight into the structure of numbers. You mentioned the Green-Tau theorem earlier.
Yes, that theorem, which proves that the prime numbers contain arbitrarily long arithmetic progressions, was solved independently.
Right. And that's a massive achievement because the sequence of prime number reciprocals does diverge. So the Green-Tau theorem is actually an implication of the broader Erdős conjecture. Proving the full conjecture would be a foundational tool.
Then there's the problem almost every math enthusiast knows. The Collette's conjecture, also called the 3n plus 1 problem. For that, he offered a more modest $500 prize.
It's deceptively simple, isn't it? Start with any positive integer n. If it's even, divide by 2. If it's odd, multiply by 3 and add 1. And the conjecture is that you will always, eventually, reach the number 1.
So easy to state, but maddeningly difficult to prove.
It's driven mathematicians mad for decades. Erdős considered it one of those problems that look trivial but are actually incredibly hard.
And what's remarkable is that these offers are still active today. Despite his death in 1996, Ronald Graham, one of his closest collaborators, became the informal administrator of the prizes.
And the prize payoff has a legendary quirk, speaking to Erdős' eccentric reputation. The solver has a choice. You can receive a cashable check from Graham,
Or you can choose an original, non-cashable check signed by Erdős himself as a memento, a piece of mathematical history.
Exactly. And the legacy is still very much alive. A website dedicated to cataloging and tracking these open problems was even started just recently in 2024.
If Section 2 was about his unprecedented mathematical output, Section 3 is about the unprecedented, almost ascetic way he lived to achieve it. Possessions, according to the biographies, meant very little to Erdős. He rejected materialism entirely. We know most of his belongings fit entirely into that single suitcase.
His entire economic life was a mechanism for funding mathematics, awards, earnings, stipends from guest lecturing. They were immediately used to fund his travels, cover his minimal needs, and, most importantly, provide those cash prizes. He saw surplus money as something that should immediately be invested back into the field he loved.
He gave away everything he earned.
Pretty much. He lived entirely for the proof. This brings up the famous quotation that perfectly encapsulates his life philosophy. His colleague, Alfred Rényi, is quoted as saying, "A mathematician is a machine for turning coffee into theorems."
And Erdős was the ultimate machine, wasn't he? Consuming copious quantities of coffee, the fuel that kept the itinerant engine running.
It's an easy quote to misattribute to Erdős himself, but the sources are clear that Erdős ascribed it to Rényi. Coffee was really the only personal luxury he truly indulged in, essential for maintaining that high-octane focus.
This relentless focus led to some dramatic coping mechanisms, particularly after a major life change. After his mother, Anna, died in 1971, and we have to remember their extremely close lifelong relationship, he started taking antidepressants and amphetamines.
Specifically, Ritalin and Benzedrine, to maintain his demanding schedule and ward off the inevitable depression. This worried his closest friends, like Ron Graham.
Which led to the famous stimulant bet.
It did. Graham, concerned about his friend's health, bet him $500 that Erdős couldn't stop taking the amphetamines for a month.
And Erdős, always game for a challenge, especially a discrete problem like that, agreed. He won the bet. He managed to abstain for 30 days.
He won the $500, a significant amount of money for a man who owns so little. But the immediate aftermath of winning the bet is what truly defines his commitment to mathematics. What did he say?
He immediately complained that the month of sobriety had significantly impacted his performance. He looked at Graham, having pocketed the cash, and delivered this devastating assessment. He said, "I didn't get any work done. I'd get up in the morning and stare at a blank piece of paper. I'd have no ideas, just like an ordinary person. You've set mathematics back a month."
Just like an ordinary person.
Yeah.
He saw his sober self as fundamentally defective for his purpose.
So what did he do?
The very next thing he did, having proven that he wasn't physically dependent, he wasn't an addict in the traditional sense, was promptly resume using Ritalin and Benzedrine. For Erdős, mathematical productivity trumped everything. Personal health, social norms, even the cash prize he had just won.
The needs of the problem were greater than the needs of the man.
This raises an important question. How did this unique worldview manifest itself linguistically? Because he didn't just have unusual habits. He developed his own highly idiosyncratic vocabulary.
It was a private language, wasn't it?
A private language, often infused with dark humor, that perfectly encapsulated his view of the world and his particular brand of agnostic atheism. He nicknamed God the SF.
For supreme fascists?
Yes. He viewed the SF as this tyrannical figure responsible for small annoyances like hiding his socks and Hungarian passports, but also for the far greater tyranny, hiding the most elegant proofs from humanity.
And those elegant proofs resided in a mythological visualization he called the book.
Exactly. The book was his metaphysical concept for ultimate Platonic mathematical beauty. It was a repository of all perfect proofs, the ones so flawless, so clean, and so non-obvious that they could only have been written by the SF. When Erdős encountered a particularly beautiful proof, he would exclaim, "This one's from the book."
And he had that great line, "You don't have to believe in God, but you should believe in the book."
Which is such a fantastic way to justify the constant chase for small, perfect solutions. And his vocabulary extended to his social world as well, defining life events in mathematical terms.
So children were epsilons.
Based on the mathematical use of the Greek letter verislon to denote an arbitrarily small positive quantity. They were tiny, necessary complications in the world. His view of adult relationships was darker. Women were bosses who, by marrying them, captured men as slaves.
And so naturally, divorced men were considered liberated.
Of course. And his terms for life and death were just as starkly mathematical, reducing existence to whether or not you were actively pursuing math. People who stopped doing math had simply died. People who actually passed away had left.
He had definitions for academic activities, too. A lecture was to preach.
And the lectures themselves were sermons. Giving an oral exam to students was to torture them. And perhaps most hilariously, to be considered a mathematical hack, a figure who only produced standard, uninteresting work, was to be a Newton.
Which, coming from a mathematician, is a shocking demotion for Sir Isaac Newton, often considered the founder of modern calculus and physics.
It speaks to his deep respect for the problem-solver archetype over the systematic theory builder. He valued clean proofs, not encyclopedic systems.
And finally, his signature style was legendary, changing over the years as he aged, reflecting the self-deprecating humor about his own longevity. He started simply signing off as PGOM.
Which stood for poor great old man.
Yeah.
He acknowledged his status, his poverty, and his age all at once.
But the list grew over time, right?
Correct. When he turned 60, he added LD, representing living dead. 5 years later, at 65, he added AD for archaeological discovery.
He saw himself as a historical relic still walking around.
Pretty much. At 70, he returned to LD again, this time meaning legally dead. And finally, at 75, he finished with CD, meaning counts dead. It was this continuous, dark, mathematical joke about his own physical decline.
And his suggested epitaph. I finally stopped getting dumber. In Hungarian, that's Végre nem butulok tovább. A truly fitting, if slightly macabre, end.
If we connect this all back to the bigger picture, the sheer, unprecedented scale of his collaborations necessitated a way to measure them, and that led to his most famous non-mathematical invention, the Erdős number.
This concept was created by friends as a tribute to his prolific collaborative output. It essentially measures the degree of separation from Erdős based on co-authorships. It's the academic world's version of the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, but far more pervasive and academically relevant.
The definition is simple and elegant. Erdős himself is assigned the number 0, Anyone who directly co-authored a paper with him, the 511 people we discussed, has an Erdős number of 1.
And anyone who co-authored a paper with one of those 511 people has an Erdős number of at most 2, and so on.
Exactly. It's fascinating that this informal measure was most likely first defined by Caspar Goffman, an analyst who actually has an Erdős number of 2 himself, in a 1969 article asking, "And what is your Erdős number?"
And that phrase just launched a phenomenon. The scale and scope are enormous. Approximately 200,000 mathematicians currently have an assigned Erdős number. And because he collaborated so widely and mathematics connects to so many sciences, scientists in physics, engineering, biology, and economics also have a number.
It's much more than trivia. It's a sociological tool for mapping intellectual structure. Studies have shown that leading mathematicians tend to have particularly low numbers, suggesting low separation correlates with high prestige and influence.
It implies that these individuals are structurally positioned at key intersections of mathematical thought. What are the hard data points on that correlation?
Well, the roughly 268,000 mathematicians with a known number have a median value of 5. However, if you look at the field's medalists, the highest honor in the field, their median Erdős number is significantly lower. 3.
Wow, a median of 3, that's a huge difference.
It indicates that the major figures are intrinsically closer to the epicenter of collaboration that Erdős represented. As of 2015, approximately 11,000 mathematicians worldwide have an Erdős number of 2 or lower.
That's a stunning realization. It suggests that if you want to be a top mathematician, you need to be collaborating with the right people, and Erdős was the ultimate hub for the right people.
The American Mathematical Society recognized this practical value and provides a free online tool to determine the number for authors in their catalog. It has become a practical tool for mapping the global mathematical community.
The concept has also led to some humorous extensions, blurring the lines between academia and celebrity. The source notes the argument that Baseball Hall of Famer Hank Aaron could be considered to have an Erdős number of 1.
Not on a proof, thankfully. But they both autographed the exact same baseball for Carl Pomerantz when Emory University awarded them honorary degrees on the same day.
So a physical connection through an object.
While it's purely humorous, it highlights how the concept of separation can bridge seemingly disparate fields. Numbers have also been proposed for an infant, a horse, and several actors, just because of some indirect connection.
Beyond the collaborative structure he unintentionally mapped, his enduring legacy is built on his sheer, radical generosity, which we touched on briefly earlier.
Absolutely. The obituary written by Charles Krauthammer noted the abrupt, almost painful line. He leaves no immediate survivors. But Krauthammer countered that he left hundreds of scientific collaborators and 1,500 papers. He dedicated his life to intellectual offspring, not biological ones.
The key is that Erdős didn't just share his genius. He shared his money, even though he was famously poor. He was known as a soft touch for any charitable or hard luck causes that came his way.
Which is a beautiful contrast to his demanding social expectations as a guest. He was both demanding of logistical support and yet profoundly generous with his finances. A wonderful anecdote comes from his time in India, where he once gave away the entire proceeds from a few lectures to Ramanujan's impoverished widow.
That shows such a deep structural respect for mathematical history and a profound compassion for financial need.
It really does. But there's one anecdote that truly summarizes his life philosophy of radical, non-materialistic giving. The story of the $1,000 loan.
I love this story.
It's a perfect illustration of his ethos. Ron Graham tells the story of a promising young mathematician who desperately needed $1,000 to attend Harvard, but were short on funds. Erdős, who habitually carried maybe $30 at any one time, somehow arranged to meet the student and lent him the full amount.
And just told him to pay it back when he was able.
Exactly. Many years later, the student had graduated, was successful, and finally called Ron Graham asking how he should repay the debt that was now decades old.
So Graham asks Erdős.
He does. And the instruction he received was simple and profound. Tell him to do with the $1,000 what I did.
It was a directive to pay the generosity forward. Invest that money not back into Erdős's own wallet, but into the next generation of mathematics or into someone else in need.
The ultimate anti-hoarder. And his philanthropic spirit and impact are why he is still being honored today, long after his death. In 2021, the minor planet 405571 was formally named Oddball in commemoration.
And even more recently, in 2025, a new species of tarantula from Nigeria, Heterothelur erdosi, was named in his honor. From the nomenclature of space to the nomenclature of spiders, his name marks the intellectual map of the world. So Paul Erdős, the poor great old man, revolutionized mathematics not by building massive solitary theories, but by maximizing human connection and collaboration. He proved that genius doesn't have to be solitary. It can be a constant, wandering, highly productive conversation fueled by coffee and amphetamines.
And he chased that conversation right until the end. He died in 1996 at age 83 due to a heart attack while attending a conference in Warsaw.
And this circumstance was incredibly close to his stated ideal way to leave, which he had repeated many times over his life. He once said, "I want to be giving a lecture, finishing up an important proof on the blackboard. I'll turn to the audience and smile. I'll leave that to the next generation, and then I'll keel over."
He is now buried next to his parents in the Jewish Cosmo Street Cemetery in Budapest. But his legacy is far from settled. Erdős was a Fields Medal Zero, a mathematician who focused intensely on specific, beautiful solutions, those ideas from the book, over overarching theory construction. Yet his focused chase for these small, perfect puzzles created connections that literally mapped the global mathematical community through the Erdős number. This raises an important question for you, the listener. What if the real, enduring structure of knowledge isn't found in the great unifying theories championed by solitary thinkers, but in the myriad, complex, and sometimes chaotic connections built by hundreds of collaborators chasing small, beautiful truths?
And does maximizing collaboration inherently shift the focus from developing foundational theory to solving immediate, defined problems?
And is that ultimately a more resilient form of progress?
It's a deep concept to chew on. Thank you for joining us as we explored the incredible, unconventional life of Paul Erdős, the wandering mathematician who gave away his money, risked a fortune on his own sobriety, and taught us all that sometimes the greatest contribution you can make is simply showing up with your brain open.
Welcome to the debate. Today we're examining a truly unprecedented career in history of science, that of the Hungarian mathematician Paul Erdős, who lived from 1913 to 1996. And we're not just discussing volume here. We're talking about a man who published around 1,500 papers and worked with an astonishing 511 collaborators. I mean, it's a scale of output that you could argue fundamentally changed how mathematics was practiced in the 20th century.
And that's really the essential tension, isn't it? It's how we should categorize all that productivity. Given his unique, nomadic, intensely collaborative work style, focusing almost exclusively on solving open problems, should we view Erdős fundamentally as, say, one of the 20th century's most essential mathematical pioneers who redefined the field itself? Or was he an unmatched problem solver, a catalyst whose specific approach inherently precluded him from reaching that highest tier of conceptual, theoretical importance?
My position is that his unparalleled output and his radical social practice of mathematics represent a superior and, frankly, indispensable model for advancing the field. He was a pioneer in collaboration and a generator of truly fundamental results.
And I come at it from a slightly different angle. I'd argue that his conscious focus on solving specific problems, rather than developing vast new theoretical areas, positions him as a great catalyst, an incredible engineer maybe, but one who must be placed secondary to the architects who built the grand theoretical structures of the age.
While the numbers alone demand we view him as a pioneer, he wrote over 1,500 articles in his lifetime. The next highest figure for a serious research mathematician is, barely half that? Erdős didn't just write papers. He firmly believed mathematics was a social activity, a worldview he embodied by working with 511 different people. And this was not merely some charming quirk. This itinerant lifestyle, hopping from university to university, living out of a suitcase, it made him a vital, relentless engine of mathematical production. His presence personally stimulated mathematicians the world over, and that's a direct quote from his Wolf's Prize citation. He wasn't just fixing minor issues, he championed crucial fundamental areas like Ramsey theory and developed the probabilistic method, defining new fields altogether. Even as a young man, he produced foundational results, giving us a far neater and more elegant proof for Bertrand's postulate by the age of 20. That is not just a problem solver, that's someone who redefines methodology.
Okay, I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that the sheer quantity of co-authored papers defines fundamental conceptual importance. We have to look at the quality, and more importantly, the intent behind the work. The source material explicitly categorizes Erdős as a problem solver rather than a theory developer. And this distinction is absolutely central to what is often called the two cultures of mathematics. One culture seeks to solve existing puzzles, and the other seeks to build entirely new abstract systems. Erdős dedicated his life to the former. His work leaned towards cracking previously open problems in areas like discrete mathematics and number theory, rather than systematically developing or exploring entirely new areas of mathematics. And this distinction, well, it's profoundly reflected in institutional recognition. He never won the Fields Medal, which is the highest honor available to mathematicians during their peak career years.
But isn't that a bit of a circular argument? If the highest prize, the Fields Medal, is historically awarded to those who build vast, unifying theoretical systems, like algebraic geometry or number theory, then the criteria itself may be structurally biased against the combinatoric, problem-solving style that Erdős embodied. We can't use the absence of a Fields Medal, which is intrinsically tied to a specific theoretical culture, to dismiss the profound and revolutionary impact he had on the rest of mathematics.
Perhaps the criteria are biased, but the fact remains that when you compare his work to a Fields Medal winner, you generally see a difference in scale and abstraction. Look at the data. His style generated results in thousands of small, crucial theorems, whereas the Fields Medal recognizes the creation of frameworks that can structure entire subdisciplines. His impact was structural and catalytic, yes, absolutely, but not purely conceptual or foundational in that abstract, paradigm-shifting sense.
Okay, let's move beyond abstract systems for a moment and look at his ultimate structural impact, which you dismissed as just quantity. The creation and ubiquity of the Erdős number is not a curiosity, it's tangible evidence of his profound influence on the structure of the entire field.
But the Erdős number is a metric of collaboration distance, not necessarily of conceptual novelty.
I disagree. I think it's fundamentally more than that. The metric shows an astonishing breadth. Approximately 200,000 mathematicians have an assigned Erdős number. Just think about that reach. Furthermore, several studies confirm that the leading mathematicians in the world, including Fields medalists, have a low median number of 3. This demonstrates that Erdős wasn't just productive, he was at the absolute vital center, the nexus, of the entire global collaborative network. He literally enacted the small world phenomenon in mathematics. His constant intentional movement, his whole "my brain is open" philosophy when he'd arrive on a colleague's doorstep, that was a revolutionary contribution to the practice of mathematics itself. This kind of global connectivity, sustained over 50 years, it fundamentally redefined the optimal structure for collaborative mathematical discovery.
That's a compelling argument regarding network connectivity, I'll give you that. But what does that proximity truly reflect? It proves his efficacy as a distributor of ideas and problems. But the catalyst is rarely the architect. I mean, his biographer called him probably the most eccentric mathematician in the world, and his unconventional behavior, we know his fellowship at Princeton was cut short because the institution deemed him uncouth and unconventional. It all suggests that he was the perfect vector for optimized mathematical efficiency. He was like the courier who delivered the missing element necessary for our reaction to proceed. He had a genius for identifying two people who should work together, solving a bottleneck, and then moving on. But being a highly efficient vector who lives out of a suitcase doesn't make you the architect of the conceptual landscape.
But that's precisely the point. His style, the suitcase, the collaboration, it wasn't a constraint on his conceptual power. It was the mechanism by which his conceptual power was distributed globally, producing foundational work that theory developers later relied upon.
Well, I want to reinforce this distinction in recognition and style, which I think gets to the core difference between a catalyst and a pioneer. Let's go back to the problem solver versus theory developer idea. It's reflected so clearly in the language used to praise him by his peers. When he won the Wolf Prize in 83-84, the citation focused heavily on his stimulation of others, for personally stimulating mathematicians the world over.
And that's a tremendous, unique achievement.
It is, but contrast that with the language used for the winners immediately before and after him. Their works were recognized explicitly as outstanding, classic, profound, fundamental, or seminal.
I mean, these are terms reserved for those who build major, enduring theoretical frameworks, the architects. Erdős's specific, focused style simply did not yield that same kind of recognition. If you are hailed primarily for stimulating others, that suggests your greatest contribution was logistical and interpersonal, rather than purely conceptual, in the way the great theoretical pioneers are judged.
I see why you think that, focusing on the specific wording of the prize, but let me give you a different perspective. We can't confuse his personal style and the resulting praise for it with the actual conceptual power of his methods, because his methods revolutionized mathematics. I mentioned the probabilistic method. For listeners who aren't specialists, the probabilistic method is this groundbreaking technique in combinatorics, which is, essentially the math of discrete structures. Before or does, if you wanted to prove a certain structure existed, you had to construct it explicitly.
Right. You had to actually build the object.
Exactly. And Erdős showed that by using probability, by proving the probability of a randomly chosen structure not having the desired property is less than 1, you can prove its existence without ever having to construct or even identify it. I mean, this isn't just solving a problem. It's giving the entire field a powerful, abstract new tool. This single methodological innovation defined an entire approach now central to extremal combinatorics. Furthermore, the source notes he contributed to fields where he had, quote, little real interest.
Like topology, which he didn't care much for.
Exactly. He is credited as the first person to give an example of a totally disconnected topological space that is not zero-dimensional, the Erdős space. To make that accessible, topology is the study of shapes and spaces, and connectedness is crucial. A zero-dimensional space is one where every point can be isolated. The fact that Erdős, using his highly specific problem-solving toolkit, could produce a counterexample that demonstrated a subtle, complex limitation in our understanding of topological spaces in a field he barely worked in, that demonstrates his influence permeated fields through the sheer power of his methods, not just his charming personality.
I acknowledge the power of the probabilistic method as a tool. It is revolutionary. But revolutionary tools are sometimes best defined by the hands of the architects who incorporate them into their grand designs. My argument is that his focus was necessarily divergent from a theory developer's. Theory development requires decades of sustained, systematic focus, often in relative isolation, to build a cohesive, consistent structure. That is inherently incompatible with the nomadic problem-a-day lifestyle Erdős cultivated.
And that divergence brings us back to recognition. While the field mental bias might exist, even his own physical and mental commitment reveals the nature of his work. His focus was so narrow and intense that he openly took amphetamines to stay mathematically productive, fearing that without them he'd have no ideas, just like an ordinary person. This intensity was dedicated primarily to generating and solving specific, isolated problems. That's the definition of a problem solver who optimizes output within known boundaries, not a pioneer who ventures into unknown territory to build new ones.
That's an interesting point, though I would frame his intellectual commitment differently. And this leads to my third contention, his legacy of intellectual generosity and focus on mathematical truth itself. His dedication was paramount. His legacy extends far beyond pure academic productivity. He used nearly all of his awards and earnings to fund solutions to problems, offering payments up to $10,000 for problems that were both difficult and significant.
So he essentially crowdsourced the solution of difficult problems, using his own money as the incentive.
Precisely. And this speaks to his unique value system. There's that famous story where he told a young mathematician to pay back a loan by using the money to do what I did, giving it away to others to solve problems. This commitment to mathematical truth, prioritizing the advancement of the field over his own personal gain, demonstrates a singular dedication. He even coined the phrase, "This one's from the book," for elegant, perfect proofs, a reference to a mythical book where God keeps the most beautiful mathematical truths. This focus on maximizing elegant truth for the community, it confirms his paramount importance even after his death. His problems, like the $5,000 Erdős conjecture on arithmetic progressions,
continue to be significant intellectual drivers for the entire field. Can we truly say a theorist who builds a beautiful structure that no one can immediately inhabit is more important than the individual whose generosity and output keeps hundreds of thousands of mathematicians actively engaged in the pursuit of truth?
I respect his moral and philanthropic legacy immensely, but intellectually, his contribution remains centered on highly specific results. That single-minded intensity, fueled by the amphetamines and the constant travel, was the necessary cost of maximizing specific problem-solving output. While his generosity ensured the community was fed with problems, the creation of universal, abstract, conceptual structures that unify vast, disparate areas of mathematics, the hallmark of the greatest theoretical pioneers, was simply not his focus. He focused on the details of the tapestry, not the structure of the loom. If we look at the immediate Wolf Prize winners who followed him, their recognition was specifically for providing massive unifying theoretical frameworks.
See, I think you're creating an artificial, hierarchical distinction between building the loom and creating the most vibrant, intricate designs the loom has ever seen.
Erdős's sheer productivity and the methods he defined, the probabilistic method, the foundational results in Ramsey theory, were themselves structural. They created new corners of mathematics where theory developers now happily build. He wasn't just solving puzzles, he was designing new kinds of puzzles that demanded new conceptual approaches.
But those approaches often emerge from the need to solve his specific, highly focused challenges. The distinction is real, even if we both acknowledge his brilliance. The legacy of a theoretical pioneer is often found in the textbooks 50 years later as the foundation of a new course. The legacy of a problem solver is often found in the list of challenging, open problems that drive current research. Both are vital, but they occupy different spaces in the hierarchy of mathematical thought.
Paul Erdős was an unprecedented force of collaboration and output, who fundamentally changed the practice of mathematics, making it a truly global social activity. His network, his problem-setting ability, and his application of powerful new methods across multiple fields ensure his status as one of the most important figures of the century, proving that the problem-solver model, when pursued with such singular dedication, can be as pioneering as any theoretical system builder.
And the source material confirms there is a persistent controversy about his exact place in the pantheon. While he was a spectacular catalyst and a spectacular problem solver, the subtle yet real distinctions in his peer recognition and his approach, concentrating on particular theorems rather than developing new, unifying theoretical areas, suggest his true legacy lies in his unique genius for collaboration and problem generation, rather than founding the grand abstract theories of the 20th century.
So, whether the ultimate measure of greatness is in building abstract, unifying structures, or in solving the greatest puzzles and connecting the entire global community, Erdős forces us to consider the value of both models of mathematical production.
Precisely. The measurement of mathematical greatness is complex. It involves not just the volume of work, but the type of work, whether it builds structures or solves puzzles, whether its contribution is recognized by a Fields Medal, or whether it simply earns a hallowed place in the book. This debate really illuminates the necessary and often competing two cultures that drive mathematical progress forward.